this is Ellen Brock, freelance editor. Today I want to talk about the 5 biggest mistakes that aspiring writers make. This video was requested by a viewer who actually asked what the biggest mistake is that aspiring writers make, but I couldn't really narrow it down to just one, so I'm going to do the top 5. So number 1 is not understanding point of view. The biggest problem that I see in my client's manuscript is almost always point of view. Usually it has to do with waffling between omniscient and third limited. A lot of writers do that and they don't really realize it. I did write about that on my blog, so the link will be in the description. Head hopping is another big point of view problem that you've probably heard about and you might not really understand, so I'll also put an article about that. So you really need to understand point of view because editors are going to look at point of view issues and they're going to think this is a lot of work. It's going to take a really long time to fix these problems, and I don't know that I want to be the person to invest that time in doing it. So when you submit to an agent or a publisher, they're going to be really wary of issues with point of view, and if they see errors, they're probably not going to consider your manuscript. So that's why I would really consider that the number 1 biggest issue, because it's really going to hold you back, probably more than anything else. The second biggest mistake is too much voice. Now this might seem a little unusual that you can have too much voice, but sometimes writers are trying too hard to sound writerly and to sound interesting and poetic and creative, so they're using too many analogies and they're using too much figurative language and too much description and too many adverbs and adjectives, and it's overly described. Another potential way you could have too much voice is if you're trying to mimic somebody else's voice. For instance, you want to sound like Chuck Palahniuk or Stephen King or something like that, so you're trying really hard with the voice and it comes across as too much and it seems overdone. If you have a really strong voice naturally, that's great. Just make sure that it's not laborious to read your work, that you're not having to reread sentences over and over to understand the meaning because they're written in such a poetic and abstract way that it's difficult to grasp. This is a problem that some writers have and some don't. You're usually on one side of the fence or the other, which leads me to the third biggest mistake writers make, which is not enough voice. This is a problem when the writing just feels very standard, almost robotic. There's not a lot of personality. You don't feel close to the characters. And usually the problem is that the narrative distance is too far, meaning if you imagine your perspective as a camera, the camera is way out here, beyond all of the characters. So you're not getting into their head and you're not really delving deep into who they are. So if the narrative distance is really far, it has a tendency to make the voice feel very bland and robotic. For most writers, this is what takes the longest amount of time, is finding that balance between too much voice and not enough voice. The fourth biggest mistake is too much telling and not enough showing. I don't put this as high up because I think it can be more easily overcome and it's not as likely to scare off agents and editors as something like blatant point of view issues or blatant issues with the voice. But you really should be trying to show more than you tell. That doesn't mean you only have to show, because that doesn't really work either. It can bog down the novel with lots of scenes that you're using to show a concept that could just be told in a sentence. That's not a good idea either. But you don't want to come across like you're writing lazily and you're not really putting enough effort, so you're just sort of telling everything rather than bothering to show it. But some writers do this completely by accident. They tell a lot of things because they don't know how to show it. I have an article about that I will link to in the description that I think should really help you with that if you're having problems knowing how to show instead of tell. The fifth issue that I see is more when you get beyond the first chapter. You get beyond just a taste of your writing, and if you get the agent or the editor to read beyond that point and they're getting into the meat of the story, the biggest problem is not enough conflict. It's really important that every scene and chapter be moving the plot forward. The character needs to be moving towards a goal, which means the character has to have a goal, which is something that a lot of aspiring writers forget to include or don't really understand how to include. So it might feel like the protagonist is just sort of meandering through the story, and the scenes might be interesting, but they're not moving the plot forward because there's not a clear conflict. I did talk about that in my video about plotting, so I'm going to put that in the description just because I don't really have a better link right now, but if I make one in the future, I'll add a different one. So if you address those 5 issues, you should be way ahead of the game. and it should really give you a leg up on all the other aspiring writers in the huge slush pile when you're submitting to agents and editors. So those are the top 5 biggest mistakes that aspiring writers make. If you have a question, feel free to send it to me via email or leave a comment. I'll put my email and my website in the description. I am working through all of the video requests that I have. I have about like 15 right now. So if you haven't heard from me, I have gotten your request. I just haven't got a chance to get to it. I'm going to try to make videos more often, but it just sort of depends on my editing schedule. If this video helped you, I would really appreciate it if you would share it. And if you need any editing services or mentoring, check out my website and you can see my services and all the details there. Thanks for watching.